Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. It is now 3:37 p.m. and I am starting the Financial, Administrative, and Procurement Subcommittee meeting of AVA. It is being held in person at AVA Community Energy Altamont Conference Room, 1999 Harrison Street, Suite 2300, Oakland, California, 94612. And it's also being held remotely at the locations noted on the agenda. Please take roll.
Director Murata.
Present.
Director Kang.
Aye. Present.
Director Del Constantio is not here. Director Brown.
Present.
Director Sakakihara.
He's in attendees right now if you want to move him over.
Yes.
I think so, at least.
Yeah, I just saw him. Yeah. Thank you. I'll come back to Director Sakakihara. Director Core.
Present.
We have a quorum.
The next item is public comment. Please advise if there is any public comment. I do acknowledge the public comment we received by email.
There are no members of the public with their hand raised at this time.
Okay. Thank you. In that case, we are going to go to the item 3 on agenda, approval of minutes from September 8, 2025. This is an action item. Has everyone had a chance to review the minutes?
Yes.
May I have a motion for approval of the minutes, please?
This is Director Murata. I also move forward the minutes.
Thank you, Director Murata.
I second.
Thank you, Director Kang. Motion made by Director Murata, seconded by Director Kang. Please take roll.
Director Murata.
Public comment?
We don't. Actually, yes. Can we take public comment right now, please?
Yes, we can take public comment.
Thank you, Howard. There are no members of the public with their hand raised at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. In that case, there is a motion by Director Murata, seconded by Director Kang. May we take roll?
Yes. Director Murata.
Aye.
Director Kang.
Aye.
Director Brown.
Is it okay for me to abstain since I wasn't a part of that meeting?
Yes, you can.
Yep. Thank you.
Director Sakakihara. I think you're muted. I'll come back to Director Sakakihara. Director Core.
Aye. We will. Are we sure we have quorum for this, Raisa?
We need Director Sakakihara to either to vote on the minutes for it to be approved.
We do have quorum, but due to Director Brown abstaining, we do need Director Sakakihara to vote. I will note, Director Brown, to the extent you're comfortable, I know at times folks prefer to abstain if they were not a participant to that meeting, but you are allowed to vote for approval despite not being in attendance.
And I will confirm that the minutes are as noted as the meeting went on. They comprise the minutes. They comprise the meeting as noted in the minutes.
Okay. I'll go ahead and vote yes then.
Thank you, Director Brown.
Minutes are approved.
With the approval of the minutes, we will go on to item number 4, which is the full year 2025 mid-year budget review. This is an informational item. Rusty, are you going to be presenting?
I'm gonna
Actually,
this is Howard. I'll be presenting on this.
Thank you, Howard. We are ready for your presentation.
Give me just one moment, if you would, please excuse me for one second. I'm just getting a call from Director Sakakihara right now. I'll just note that Director Sakihara is having some technical difficulties, so is going to drop and rejoin. We do still have maintained quorum, so I'll continue forward with this informational item. So jumping into this is a mid-year budget update. We typically do this at this time of year, roughly in the February timeframe. We let some of the actuals get finalized, or at least some of the numbers to get updated, which is why we typically do this update in February. And in light of some of the material changes from a budget perspective for the latter half of the year, due to items and actions that the board has taken over the last month or so, there are some more material adjustments that we certainly want to dive into. With that said, this is a mid-year budget update. This includes figures that are closed for the months of July through November, and then it includes a soft close for December. So those are fairly accurate numbers, but there certainly is still room for movement, particularly for December. And of course, due to the fact that the other months are also not final audited months, certainly at the end of the year when we do our audited financial statements, those can further adjust as well, but they are good representations of how numbers have actualized in the first half of the year. And then the second half of the year is a forecast. And as I noted, there are some material updates to that forecast, both based off of how numbers are actualizing, as well as due to actions that the board has taken over the last month for budget adjustments. With that, we can jump to the next slide. This is a short presentation, though each slide is a bit of an eye chart. We have 3 slides. The first one is a budget update for the full fiscal year. And then the subsequent 2 slides are a breakdown of each of the 6-month periods, first half and second half fiscal year periods. So this one is a full fiscal year period, and then we'll drill down with a little bit more granularity of explaining sort of what's driving the numbers on the subsequent 2 slides. As a quick reminder, our fiscal year is July 1 through June 30th. And so on this slide, we have the full fiscal year update. The column on the left, marked budget, is what was approved in June of 2025. And the column just to the right of that, marked actuals, that reflects what I just noted, which is actuals for roughly the first half of the year with our latest forecast for the second half of the year. So that reflects our combination of actuals and latest forecast. The major changes are, I'm going to go through the bullets on the right side. We are expecting an increase in operating revenue by about $5.8 million. You can see that on the delta column just to the right of total operating revenue. That's $5.8 million. I will call out that in the board-approved budget, there was an assumed use of roughly $35 million, $35.3 million as it relates to our GASB 62, which is our rate stabilization fund. There was assumed to be a release of that in the budget column, and you can see in the actual column we have zeroed that out. So if you assume that we do not use the GASB 62, I just wanted to note that the operating revenue would increase by approximately $41 million. The next bullet, I say cost of energy is expected to increase by about $5.1 million. Again, that's for the full fiscal year. Our overhead expenses are forecasted to be reduced by about $3.5 million. There are some hiring deferrals, some expense reductions. That is a number that you may recognize that we provided an overview on during the recent budget overview and some of the actions that we requested from the board. The next line item is non-operating activity. That's expected to add an additional roughly $13.2 million to net revenues. That's under non-operating activity. That includes some of our local development funding, and that is the primary driver of that change, in addition to some movements in interest income. Our net revenues, the very last line item of this table, is projected to be a positive $17.5 million. When we moved forward with our budget approval in June, we had forecasted a deficit of approximately $35 million. And that's what the GASB 62 on the budget column reflected, was a utilization of $35 million from our rate stabilization fund to offset that to zero. And so if we assume that we did not use that, so we have more of an apples to apples comparison between those two columns, that would indicate net revenue increases by approximately $52.8 million. So that is for the full fiscal year. That incorporates the various actions and approvals that the board recently took. Obviously, it incorporates our actuals for the first half of the year, and then some updates in energy prices, et cetera, for the second half of the year. We'll break that down for each of the 6-month periods on the next 2 slides, and that'll give a little bit more granularity. So, Rice, if you can go to the next slide. Also, just wanted to know, Raisa, that we have Director Sakihara in as an attendee. If we want to move him over.
He has been promoted.
Great. So moving on to the next slide, slide 4. This is a breakdown of July 1 through December 31st for 2025, primarily a reflection of actuals. To be clear, as I already noted, July through to November are closed books. December is a soft close, so those numbers still have a little bit more room for movement, but are fairly reliable to reflect as actuals. The format and setup of the table is exactly the same with our budget, our board approved budget on the left side, and then our actuals on the right side. And I'll go through the bullets again to sort of summarize what are the primary drivers of changes. Revenue from sales were about $40.1 million under budget. This is primarily driven by lower load resulting from milder than expected weather. So it was a fairly mild summer, and that is the biggest driver for our revenues, generally speaking. Obviously, putting aside any material changes in rates, of course, it is primarily weather more than anything else. Milder weather means lower load, and therefore $40 million lower in sales, electricity sales. I will also say, due to the expansion to Stockton and Lathrop, anytime you expand, obviously we do our best to do a load forecast for new jurisdictions. And while we do have historical data on what that load looks like, that load is never as accurate than Ava directly serving that load. So that is also a little bit of room for some of the reconciliation and differences in terms of budget versus actuals. Next, I'll touch on cost of energy. That was approximately $20.9 million under budget. That's driven by lower load, as already noted, under the lower sales, as well as lower energy prices. It also was a reflection of higher than forecasted RA sales and higher than forecasted large hydro production. So when we manage our resource adequacy positions due to varying compliance obligations month to month, we are always in a position where we can sell length for certain hours for our RA position. That's what that is noted here in terms of higher than forecasted RA sales. That's what we're referring to. And then similarly for higher than forecasted large hydro production, based off of the weather year, the amount of rainfall and some of the allocations that we receive related to large hydro, we were able to receive a larger allocation, and therefore you go out to market and buy a bit less of that. So again, that leads to some lower energy costs. This is partially offset by higher REC costs, and that's as a result of higher market price benchmarks. Market price benchmark, as just a really brief reminder, is something that's utilized both in the PCIA and the rate setting process, where you look at sort of the average cost of some of those transactions, and it creates a market price benchmark that's utilized in some of the regulatory proceedings that we've referenced. And so that price is used for some of our REC volumes, not all of our REC volumes. So that led to offsetting some of that reduction in cost. So you can see cost of energy went down by about $20 million, whereas revenues went down by about $40 million. Our overhead expenses were about $5.1 million below budget. That's due to some cost reductions, some deferred hiring getting pushed a little bit in the year, and deferred functional area costs, some of that being covered in our recent budget overview. The next line item is non-operating activities, increased net revenues by about $10 million. That's from a combination of higher interest rates on investments and then reduced local development funding following the December board decisions. And then lastly, when you look at net revenues and all of those variances that I just spoke to actually nets out to a fairly modest adjustment comparing actuals to budget. So our net revenues is about $2 million below expected budget. So we're pretty closely in line with what we originally forecasted, despite some material movements on each of the individual line items. So that's the first half of the year. Those are fairly reliable numbers, though of course those will adjust a little differently as we fully close the books. Let's move on to the last slide, Raisa. Slide 5, this perhaps is the most interesting part of this update because this does include changes that came or resulted from our recent board meeting in December. Again, this is the January 1 through June 30th, 2026 timeframe. So obviously we are just starting this 6-month period right now. So this is really a forecast of these next 6 months. The January numbers are also a forecast, despite us being towards the end of the month. That is not a reflection of sort of actuals or anything that we've been able to see thus far, given when we posted this and we pulled the data and everything. So again, I'll run through the same line items as I did on previous slides. Revenue from electricity sales is forecasted to increase by $44.2 million. This is driven by changes in the value proposition following the board actions in December. And also a reflection of higher than forecasted 2026 rates. And then San Joaquin County enrollment in May. In the budget meeting, we had that later in the year. So all of those things combined materially increased revenues. And then operating revenue, if you ignore the $35 million that was expected to be released from GASB 62 in our budget, our operating revenue was increasing by $79.6 million. So fairly material increase there, driven by those various factors that I just identified. Cost of energy, I'll touch on that next. That's forecasted to increase by about $26 million relative to budget. This is largely the same reason that I noted on the previous slide. So this was higher REC costs due to increased market price benchmarks. That was a material driver there. And then also higher energy costs relative to where we forecasted prices in June of 2025. So energy prices have forecasted to go up for 2026, relatively speaking. I will note that in December, when we reviewed the budget update and some of the proposed actions to the board, we had forecasted lower energy prices for 2026 relative to budget. And now we're forecasting higher energy prices relative to budget and also higher energy prices relative to what we showed in December. That is largely a reflection of the nationwide sort of cold snap. We don't feel that here in the Bay Area right now. It's a beautiful sunny day. We're lucky here in January, but as we probably know, reading the news and such, very, very extreme cold temperatures, winter storms hitting a lot of the country. That has a significant impact on natural gas prices, which have spiked just over the last month. So just in this last month, our energy costs have increased about $16 million. So that's all, within reason for our budget and what we have to manage those types of variances, but a good indication for the type of volatility that we face in energy markets based off of fairly unpredictable weather patterns. So I did want to flag that as a good illustrative point when we talk about volatility in the energy markets. In overhead, we have continued savings from what we showed in the previous slide, largely due to deferred hiring for open positions. And then we do see a slight increase in some of the other overhead expense line items. Again, this is all based off of a forecast. We had a number of deferred costs from the first half of the year, and so those are anticipated to come and actualize in the back half of the year. But if you look at the full year as a whole, that's where it rounds out to about approximately a reduction of $3.5 million. So that's overhead. On non-operating expenses, it includes reduced local development funding. That's the primary driver there. Again, it's $5 million here. It's $5 million in the first half, so that equals a total $10 million. Which is what was identified in the board actions. Lastly, net revenues are expected to increase by $19.5 million from the original budget. And again, calling out the GASB 62 or the Rate Stabilization Fund utilization of $35 million, which was in the original approved budget. If you zero that out, net revenues increases by about $55 million without the use of the GASB 62. So that's for the fiscal year. I want to just highlight and acknowledge that when we did the budget review in December, we're talking about the full 2026 calendar year in addition to the second half of calendar year 2025, because we wanted to show how that what that forecast was in 2026 and what was so significant there in terms of needing to manage a forecast deficit. So this is just a fiscal year period. I think for the this is initial preview of this mid-year budget update. For the February board meeting, we will do this same presentation. We'll likely enhance it with some additional slides and information to talk a little bit more about where those rates have actualized, where the deviations were relative to what we presented in December. We're still analyzing that further, building on some of that information. So this is the first piece of that, and a little bit more detail will be provided in our next review with the full board meeting later in February. That is it on this presentation, and I'll see if there's any questions.
Please, members, if there are any questions, now is the time. I see Director Brown has her hand raised, as well as Director Sakakihara, as well as Director Murata. I did not see who raised their hand first, but I can just call on Director Brown, please.
Yep, and I'm going to be brief. I was just going to thank you, Howard, for the presentation. Definitely makes sense. And then we'll be on standby for our next meeting in February to get the additional information as well.
Director Sakakihara?
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Sorry, everyone, for the technical difficulties that I always seem to have at these meetings. Wanted to echo Member Brown in thanking you, Howard, and the rest of the team for the presentation. I have three, hopefully pretty quick questions. Let me see if I can remember them. First one is just, can you remind me, do we do this sort of, I know we do the look back every quarter, but do we do kind of a reforecasting every quarter as well, or is that every half year?
That's typically every half year, so just due to the level of effort there, and certainly as a response to the more meaningful changes that our board took action on, we certainly wanted to provide this update as a mid-year budget update. We do a quarterly look back for our unaudited financial statements, so we do have that, but we don't typically update our forecast with the board other than the mid-year review. To the extent there are material changes that require flagging, and certainly, of course, if they required any response and action, we would, but that would be more ad hoc as needed.
Got it. But near the end of April-ish, or whenever the meeting of this body is closest there, we'll know how we did with prices that are reflected in financials January through March. We just won't do the forward-looking. Yeah.
That's right. We don't do a formal one quarterly, but with that said, when we start initiating the budget review of the next fiscal year, which is in the May and June meetings, we do also include, sort of a snapshot of what we're expecting for how this year will wind up, because obviously that will speak to, reserves and things like that. So there's certainly some implication when we look at the next fiscal year for budget approval that we will update on. So while that's true, we don't do a formal sort of quarterly update on the forecast. Because we're at the end of the year, you'll get a sense of that, a pretty good sense of that.
Got it. And you're actually going into, I might have missed a little bit of when you were speaking during the presentation, but then you were just touching out too, is that the changes that we saw in the first half of the fiscal year and, in the reforecasting of the rest of the fiscal year, are those also impacting the next fiscal year's projections as well? Is that what you were saying?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it is always common that, as prices change, it's going to probably extend beyond the 6-month period or whatever financial period that we're specifically looking at. And in this case, absolutely, there are implications there. So for next fiscal year, both the second half of calendar year 2026 and as we look at 2027, I think we do expect other changes to ripple through from a variety of things in terms of how rates actually got finalized, in addition to the typical volatility that we see in the energy markets. So yes.
Got it. Yeah, and I think that, and again, sorry if you already touched on this in the presentation, but I think it will be helpful to see kind of the same window, right? A little bit of apples of apples. If we were kind of doing a weird I forget if it was 18 months or calendar year, right? But it was straddling a few months back. And then now, what's that going to look like now that, it looks like energy prices are at least higher in the immediate term? And that was my last question, which was just, do you have a sense of, there's a pretty big fluctuation between budget and actuals in the first half of the fiscal year, and then now the change even more so for the second half of the fiscal year in the forecast is pretty big. And I'm wondering, is this amount of fluctuation kind of, you know, within a standard deviation of what we expect, pretty normal, or is it more like 2 or 3 out, or this is like, I'm just curious, like when we look at these numbers, you always caveat it very well with like, hey, it's not going to come in where we think. We just don't know. Like, this is our best guess right now. I'm curious, like, is this a normal amount off, or like, how much of an outlier event was this?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I hesitate to simplify it to say this is normal or not. I mean, there's just so many variables and factors that we're looking at here. So maybe I'll just, without overly simplifying, I'll try to dissect a couple pieces there to help illustrate what we're talking about here. So it's unusual, first of all, that rates go down so materially from one year to the next. So, everything that, kind of drove the very substantive meetings that we had with the board recently for generation rate reduction from 25 to 26, that is unusual. You don't typically see a 20-30% reduction in rates year after year. That is an unusual reflection of market volatility, which market volatility is higher just relative to historicals right now. And it was also driven by some of the regulatory reform. So obviously that's a little bit less predictable. It tends to be concentrated. That's not normal, yet obviously there is regulatory reform that happens every so often. So I would say that's more than typical. I'll also say that just between our December board meeting to, actually getting finalized rates for 2026, those actually got finalized a little differently than we expected. So we were forecasting lower generation rates overall, and they lowered, of course, substantively. But it wasn't quite where we expected to be. And it was still about, we were forecasting about a 30% reduction in generation rates, and it was more like about 20% reduction in rates. That's better for our financial headroom, of course, but that variance is a little bit surprising. Typically between your October era and your end of the year AET, which is your annual energy true up, there's not such a material change. So that was not anticipated. That is part of a 250-page filing document with underlying work papers and files, some of which are confidential, that we are trying to work through right now within our regulatory team to understand what drove that. So I can't say exactly why that happened, but we do reflect those numbers here. So that's a little bit unusual, I'll say. And then the other piece I'll say is maybe your comment may have been more centered around the energy market volatility. I'll say, a $16 million swing in energy costs, across a month or two, that's not that unusual. It can certainly happen when you have a cold spell, when you have a heat wave, you will see those types of energy spikes. Is it expected to have those heat waves? That's where it's really hard to predict, of course. So I would say that $16 million I sort of referenced, that's not scary, that's not unusual. It's certainly not within what you would expect week to week, month to month, but it absolutely happens within, kind of a multi-year phase, pretty commonly. And when the best way to maybe illustrate that is cold spells, heat waves, how predictable are those? However extreme that heat wave is, it's probably leading to some more extreme energy price spikes as well.
But it sounds like some combo of, 16% not being unusual, but not being common, plus this like somewhat surprising drop, right, from 30 to 20%. Plus we're starting from a weird, I mean, maybe that could have been a little bit too, right? That we were projecting it to decrease so much that then it's kind of bouncing back in a way. Or maybe I'm kind of anchoring, but that's very helpful because as we're going to continue to have to face a lot of these challenging decisions in the next year or two, this is good information on the types of ways it could end up differing from where we think it's going to be. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Director Core, to the extent you're speaking, you're on mute. There is one more hand raised from Director Murata that I'll just flag if you'd like to go to him. And with all due respect to Chair's prerogative, perhaps we'll just go ahead and do that. Maybe there's some technical difficulty. So, Director Murata, would you like to ask some questions?
Hi, good afternoon, Howard. Well, let me be the third person to say good job on getting us through this and doing what you can in order to slim down our deficits here. So if I could, allow me to go to that last slide there, and if I could just summarize what I'm seeing, and maybe to help some of my fellow directors as well interpret just a summary, which is that for the period January through June, that while we still are going to be operating, in a gloomy, what looks to be a gloomy forecast, it's not as gloomy as we would imagine it to be when we did the original budget, right? So we're going from what looks to be a net revenue deficit of 133.7 million. We're saying, hey, you know what? Not so bad. We're only really at 114.2 million dollar deficit, which our delta is a positive 19.5. Is that okay to summarize that in that way, Howard?
Yeah, just for the second half of the year, I think that's an accurate reading of what's been updated. And of course, when you look at the full year, we were moving from what was a forecasted deficit of $35 million to a plus 17. So if you're combining the first half of the year, which is operating with the surplus, and the second half of the year, which is operating with the deficit, we're going from a somewhat modest deficit to a somewhat modest surplus. And I think that is all a reflection primarily of the actions that the board took to manage that deficit in preparation, because the second half of the calendar year is going to be a more challenging, strained financial period. And so to now have a slight surplus there will be good going into that period.
Okay. Good. Thank you for allowing me that summary. So then I'll ask my second and final question, but it's a challenging one, Howard, which is simply that I wouldn't be doing my job as a director if I didn't ask you, what else can we do in order to manage our expenses in the second half of the year?
Yeah, it's a great question, and maybe I would really lean on the discussion and the presentations that we had over the November-December timeframe. The board has taken action now to help manage that. So what we are already planning to do, without speaking to further actions we can of course take, is we have adjusted that value proposition. And so that will impact the second half of the calendar year and potentially beyond, obviously, depending on when and if the board takes any further adjustments to value proposition. But right now it is set in a way that probably optimizes for helping to manage some of our financial risk. We have made some reductions to renewable energy procurement, so some of that's reflected here, and then some of that would be reflected for future periods. We have made some cuts to overhead expenses, some deferrals, some cost reductions. Those are three of the biggest items that we've done. And then local development budget, thank you. And so that was the other component that's reflected here. There are still budget decisions to make as we go into the May-June timeframe, of course. So we will continue to see how things actualize and see if the actions that the board has taken in the December meeting are sufficient to cover the risks that we see ahead of us. Right now, there's no reason to believe that they are not sufficient. But of course, as we're talking about, numbers do actualize differently than are forecasted commonly. That is, quite frankly, that's the expectation. But I think we have our rate stabilization fund, we have our reserves to manage that risk. And we've touched on some of the different levers that we can pull. What is important to reflect here is we have the rate stabilization fund that we are anticipated to utilize the next fiscal year. So, where we had at the beginning of this current fiscal year, the budget setting timeframe, we had approval and forecasted a $35 million deficit. We have now offset that with the actions we've taken because we see that more significant deficit on the horizon in the latter half of 2026. And so we've taken those actions to actually operate with a at least forecasted modest surplus of about $17 million. We will be able to take that into the next fiscal year. And hopefully numbers actualize a little bit in our favor, and we can continue to modestly use rate stabilization fund. But again, that is what we're forecasting. So we have that there to utilize in addition to the other actions we took. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you. Just in the back of my mind, always just I always tend to consider that the RSF is a finite amount of money, right? But expenses, that's practically infinite because it's always going to come at you. So when I hear the mention of deferrals, I'm perfectly okay with that. But deferrals just simply means we're not spending it today or we're going to spend it tomorrow or some other time. So I don't have a problem with what we're looking to do for the second half of the year. Where I will be keeping an eye on is, as we actualize the second half of the year and we begin our forecast for next year, right? Where do the deferrals show up, and are the deferrals going to be problematic? So that's just I mean, for Rusty, who I'm sure is always looking at this as well. I'm just kind of giving you a heads up on how I'm going to think about it. So, for now, I am satisfied with where we are. I'm satisfied with our board actions prior to the holiday to uplift the RSF so we can weather this as best as possible. But I also, in some ways, y'all, I keep going back to board member Roche and her statement that we do have certain traditions, and in the past, tradition was to provide on-bill credits. So I know I'm the freshman, but I do hold that near and dear to my heart, which is how do we also give back to our community who may be facing certain insecurities, whether it be food insecurity or housing insecurity, or in some cases, energy insecurity. So that's all I'm saying. I don't mean to get on my soapbox too much. Let me reiterate, you're doing great, and I think we're fine with where we are. But I'm also keeping an eye on what can we do better for our community overall. So thank you. I'll get off my soapbox, and I'll be quiet.
Thank you for those comments. If I could make one just clarifying statement, more on your former comment on cost deferrals. I did just want to make sure that my comment was clear. That reference was in regards to overhead expenses, and the deferrals I'm talking about are an order of magnitude of $1-2 million in a $900 million operating expense. So those are fairly modest numbers that I was referring to when I spoke to deferrals. Your point is still well taken of, we have to be ready to manage risk and what other actions can we take. So certainly there are things that we can do from an overhead and from an energy procurement perspective. And, we've addressed some of those, but we will continue to think about that in addition to, our rate stabilization fund reserves that we can utilize, but we want to be very stringent with. And certainly we will raise this as we go to the the next fiscal year budget review. And we will absolutely raise this if numbers actualize in a concerning way that is out of line with this forecast and what we have planned. So appreciate those comments.
Thank you so much, Howard. Appreciate the presentation, and thank you for helping me with my technical difficulty. I appreciate that as well, and we look forward to the updates that you will be presenting to this presentation in February. With that, is there any discussion amongst members on this item?
Do you want to take public comment?
Sure, I will take public comment.
There are no members of the public with their hand raised at this time.
Any discussion? Fellow directors? Okay, seeing and hearing none, I will go ahead to the next item, which is the overview of contracts entered into. This is again an informational item. It is a brief follow-up to input from the board upon the implementation of the latest procurement policy to discuss the details of the monthly contracts entered into item. So we are ready for that presentation whenever staff is ready to proceed.
Great. I'm going to speak on behalf of John Perkins, who's traveling at the time. Hopefully this can be a fairly efficient item. As you already noted, we have had some changes to administrative procurement policy, and we've had some recent questions, comments just made about how we want to present information as it relates to our contracts reporting. So this is a follow-up to that request from board members to make sure that we're revisiting that and having an opportunity for a discussion and considering any changes on that reporting structure. What we have laid out in this memo, starting at the bottom of this page and going to the following page, apologies for the formatting since that is broken up a little bit, but there are a number of fields that we're including in our contracts entered into standard report. This is a report that we included every single board agenda item for all the contracts that we enter into. And so we kind of detail the fields that we have here. I'll very quickly walk through them. And then I'll also note that as an attachment to this memo, we have included one of the recent items that we included with one of the board agenda items, just to illustrate exactly how we format that table and to give you some, real contracts that we've entered into to really help, speak to these various fields. So first we have the counterparty name, of course, so who we're entering the contract into the contract with. That identifies the vendor. We also have a record name that provides the name of the agreement. That's a fairly short form descriptor of that type of agreement. We have a contract purpose. So that is a brief summary of the agreement for reference to better understand, what is being scoped under that particular contract. We have a contract value. So that's the committed spend for the fiscal year, or at least an estimate of such to the extent those fees are variable. So those are those four fields, and we can go to the next page. Thank you, Raisa. Then we have a not to exceed amount, which provides the maximum financial obligation to AVA over the life of the agreement. Some of these agreements are multi-year contracts, and so that's the differentiator between the contract value and the not to exceed amount. We have an expiration date, so that's the last day of the term of the agreement. We have the city, which identifies the headquarters or the relevant domicile of operations of the vendor that is engaged on the agreement. We have the state similarly, and then lastly we have the ironclad ID. That's our contracts management system. Probably not the most relevant field, but certainly allows our staff to quickly identify a contract that we've entered into. So that's there for reference as well. And then Raisa, if you want to scroll on, what we included as an attachment, it happens to be consent item number 5 from our December board meeting. There's nothing particularly unique about that one, but just wanted to illustrate this latest format and how we provide the information. And certainly, these particular vendor names will just help to illustrate the point a little further. Counterparty name there, the first column, ICF Resources as an example. There we have the record name, September 25 amendment to the consulting service agreement. We have our contract purpose, which is to extend the term and increase the not to exceed amount. In this case, this is an amendment. The contract value is stated there, $166,000, and not to exceed amount is stated there, $312,000. The expiration date, which is May 31st, 2027. Then we have the city and state for that particular entity, Reston, Virginia. And then lastly, the ironclad ID number, IC-2055. And you can see there's a handful of other contracts there that I certainly won't walk through every single column for those entities, but I think can help to illustrate how we've been providing this information, and welcome feedback on whether we feel this is sufficient. If there's more information that the board would like to see, I'll flag that what we have provided here is pretty automated, efficient from what we pull from the system, and we can absolutely add more information and would welcome that discussion. And we can always discuss whether that's something that's automated and easily to pull, or something that would potentially be a little bit more time intensive and cumbersome. But welcome the feedback. And that's it.
So are we ready for questions then, Howard, or feedback?
Yes.
Yes, directors, if there is any feedback, please, this is the time. Director Murata?
Thank you, Chair. Howard, this is great. And this was me, right? I'm the one who called and put this up. So this is awesome. I like it. One comment is, could we have under contract, what was it? Hold on a second. Under the column called record name, some of the entries, and maybe this is just an example, and so I'm picking on something that isn't nearly relevant, but some of the entries under record name tend to repeat with generality that make it far less effective as a statement. So, for example, the first row, ICF says September 2025 amendment to consulting services agreement. Okay. What sort of consulting is it? And then if you scroll down to the next page, Merrimack Energy Group, November 2025 consulting services agreement. I think you guys operationally know exactly what those firms do, but as a board member trying to read this, I'm like, okay, what do they do? So if you could add 4 more words to say because they do this, that would be helpful. So again, just a recommendation.
Okay. Could I just comment there? Just choosing Merrimack as that example you pointed to. If you looked at the column to the right with contract purpose, it details, for example, for Merrimack, it's a contractor with a consultant to provide a one-time initial review and assessment of the reasonableness of our confidential benchmark value reference price. That's just one particular example. Is that getting to your point, or is there something that you can just illustrate for me so I make sure I understand the detail that you're pointing to?
So Merrimack, hey, that's fine. That was a bad choice on my part. Scroll down to the next page. Jewel, Stewart, Pratt, Beckerson, and Carr, PC. Look at what that says, right? EcoMotion. All right, well, what do they do? It's a $20,000 contract with a full contract value of close to $500,000. So just tell what does NTE mean? That sort of thing. Just give it to me so that I can read it and be like, okay, this is fine, is acceptable, or for in my reassurance, just like, yeah, we EcoMotion does X. That's all.
Understood. That's good feedback. Absolutely, we will make that adjustment. For quick clarification, the reason why that is because the Merrimack contract is a first-time contract. So we put the scope, and where it's an amendment, we're speaking to the intention of the amendment is not adjusting the scope. It's simply extending the term, so we keep it simple. But I hear your point, which is how would you know what the EcoMotion contract is? It's technically been disclosed when we first signed that contract, but we will make it easier and provide that quick summary here as well in terms of the scope of the work. So I think that's what you're calling out. Am I correct?
Yes, thank you.
Great.
Thank you, Howard. Thank you, Director Murata, for bringing this, and thanks, Howard, for doing a great job. Director Brown?
Yep. Thank you so much for the presentation and update. I would also, that was one of my notes about the details of the contract, because if a board member maybe wasn't around when, we entered into the specific contract, so we wouldn't know what it was. Whereas I do get and understand, we're simply extending the term, but explaining what is the service that they are providing, I think that would be great. And then my question, I guess I just had a clarifying question, because I think we discussed this at one of our larger board meetings, and I guess I wanted to ask a clarifying question around, will the practice be to present this kind of report in this committee first? Because I'm looking at the info that's here now, and I believe nothing has changed from when we saw it on our last board meeting. So would the goal be in future FAB meetings that we would actually be having a look at contracts entered into and kind of getting a first look at it, and then it's going to the full board? Or should we always be looking out for the attachment that's added to the full board meeting? Hopefully that makes sense.
I think it does make sense. The intention here was, for this particular item, was just to review the formatting, whether the information is sufficient for the board's needs in regular review. so that we can standardize the process. And going forward, we were not anticipating any change to the current process, which is put it on the board meeting so it's in one place as opposed to running it through multiple meetings. Just assuming that may create some confusion of where it sits within various board documents and such. So yeah, the intention is to just keep this on the regular board meeting and continue to be in consent. And of course, if the board would like to at any point pull on anything or just ask a clarifying question, that would likely be the most efficient place to just do it all in one place at one particular meeting, if that suits your interest and needs.
Okay, yep, just wanted to clarify so that, you know, we know where to like make sure we're looking in preparation. So, thank you for clarifying.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Howard. Thank you, Director Brown. If there are no further clarifying questions, we'll go to public comment.
There are no members of the public with their hand raised at this time.
That concludes public comment on this item. We will go to any discussions on this item that the directors may have. Okay, seeing and hearing no requests for discussions, we can proceed to the next item.
Next item is
Committee member and staff announcements, including requests to place items on future board agendas. Okay, if there are any hand raised, please alert me because I don't see the full screen here on my phone. There are no hand raised. We can go. We can adjourn this meeting at 4:20.
Apologies, member Core. I just wanted to flag something on my end. We have listed the next FAP meeting as Wednesday, March 25th at 3:30. My understanding is there's a potential board conflict for that day with members potentially going to the Cal Cities event. And so I just wanted to flag that we will be reaching out to just poll availability for that particular meeting, the next FAP meeting, just to ensure that we can hit a quorum. And to the extent we can't, we'll either look to reschedule that or to cancel that meeting, depending on whether there are material items to present for that. So just flagging that to be on the lookout in your in your emails as we do that quick poll of availability. That's one.
Thank you.
Two, on a totally separate note, I just wanted to flag that this evening we'll be doing a Resilience Hub workshop at our offices. My understanding is registration's really good right now. There's a lot of interest to attend that. There's both in-person and virtual attendance for that. We have information online for those that may still be interested in attending that. So really excited for that work, understand the importance of resilience hubs and hearing from our communities. So just wanted to flag that for people's awareness.
Great. Thank you so much for flagging both items that the March 25, 2026, 3:30 p.m. will potentially or most likely will be rescheduled. And for us to keep an eye on our calendars for the poll to go out. And thank you so much for the work on resiliency hubs. With that, are there any further announcements or from staff or committee members? Okay.
Nothing from staff.
All right. In that case, we are ready to adjourn. It is now 4:30 p.m. and we are hereby adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.